Welcome to video 7 of the Pro Tools Bootcamp, the final video of them all. We're looking at customizing Pro Tools and getting it set up to work just the way you want, because that's the beauty of this program is all of the things you've learned so far are going to help you make music. But if you can adjust the settings and preferences the way you like, you're going to be able to have a much more fluid experience and you're going to enjoy Pro Tools because it'll be suited to your taste, because everybody works in Pro Tools differently. So let's look at a few of those things and how we can tweak them. The first thing you want to do is set up your preferences and settings, because this can affect a lot of things. We do that from the setup menu and then we choose preferences. And with the Pro Tools preferences, you have a bunch of tabs up at the top. Let's start at the very left. This is the display tab. This is obviously where you can affect your display settings. And the few ones that I want to show you here are always display marker colors. And we're going to show you why that's important in a second when I show you markers. The way the color coding setup for your tracks can be adjusted here. For instance, I like my tracks to be color coded by track type. So all my audio tracks are one color. All my instrument tracks are another color. All my aux inputs are another color. Okay? But you can have that changed by every track as its own separate color. Even all the audio tracks are all going to change. Or you want the groups to be colored. Whatever it is you want, you can choose that here. And then the same thing is true with regions. You can have all the regions be different colors by the track, or they can be by group, or they can be by marker location. And if you start messing with these and clicking OK, you'll see what I mean. You'll see them change. But this is where you can change the overall color features on your display settings. Now, while I have you there, let me show you how you adjust the colors on your tracks if you haven't already. If we click and drag this out, right here to the left, you have what's really the color button. I just double click it and it opens up a dialog box, and you can say, you know what, I really want my audio tracks to be a lighter blue. And it went ahead and adjusted all my audio tracks right there because that's the way I have it set up. And you can adjust the saturation, really light, darker. This is going to affect everything. Brightness, be darker, brighter, whatever you like. So you can adjust all that simply, and if you turn that off, you can adjust all that simply from this little menu here that we double clicked on the track color. If you click this button, the saturation button, I call it the track saturation button, it takes away the color on the actual tracks themselves. Makes all my tracks gray. In essence, this is the way Pro Tools always used to look, and then only the edges or the bottoms and tops changed colors. And in version 7, they changed that so you can simply check that box and the whole tracks look like that color, which is very, very helpful. So you can change all your colors here, whatever you like. Okay, so that's where you're going to adjust the actual colors. But back here in the preference window is where you're going to see, I want my color codes to be grouped by track type or whatever. So see what you like and go for it. One that I want to show you here in display is, you want to see the quick start when you start up Pro Tools. You can change that here or not. Okay. The other thing also is you can organize plugins by manufacturer, category, and manufacturer, or just a flat list. It's usually more helpful to keep it by category. That way you can see all your EQ plugins, all your dynamic plugins. All right. Operation tab. This gives you a few things here that are important to know. Make sure you've got this guy checked. Enable session file auto backup. This is helpful because it will always be backing up sessions in case you didn't save and you closed out of it. You can adjust how many backups you want to keep and how often you want it to back up. This is also an important one here. Timeline insertion / play start marker follows playback. Okay, what this means, if it is checked, that means if I am over here, okay, if this is checked, click OK. I'm going to zoom in here. If I'm at the beginning of this region and I press play, and I press stop, my cursor is right here where I stopped. Okay, I haven't clicked yet. It's exactly where I stopped. Now it's right here, okay? Just like if you had a CD or a VCR and you press play and you press pause, it keeps it right where you stopped it. Now, that may not seem like a problem, but what you may find is when you're editing, you're listening to a section over and over again. When you're mixing, you're listening to a section over and over again. So a lot of times you'll press play and then you want to adjust something and press play again and hear that same section without having to come back and re-click here. That's what that option changes. I don't want the timeline insertion or the actual play start marker to follow playback at all, okay? Now, it follows my timeline selection, so it'll start wherever I want it to start, but I don't want it to follow playback. That way I can have it right here, press play, and stop. And look, it's back here at bar 1. You'll find that that's very, very helpful most of the time. All right, back to the preferences. Let's go ahead and take a look at editing. The biggest thing here in the editing preferences, I think, is the zoom toggle. Now, zoom toggle is controlled by hitting the letter E. If you're in this keyboard shortcut focus mode here, your A to Z is clicked right up here. By default, I can use those short keyboard shortcuts like the letter C for copy and the letter V for paste as opposed to Command or Control C or Command or Control V, right? Now, the letter E is your zoom toggle, and it will do different things depending on your preferences. Right now, when I click the letter E on a MIDI region, it makes it that height, it zooms it in, and it puts me into note view, okay? If I click E again, I'm back here simply in region view, okay? Even if my track height's different. Click E, and that's what it's set up to do. E and you're back. It's a very quick zoom and toggle to a different view feature if you just want to edit one thing, okay? Now to adjust that, you come back up here to the zoom toggle things, and this is where you can adjust what you want zoom toggle to look like. Do you want the vertical MIDI zoom to be the selection or the last used? Same thing with horizontal zoom. The selection is what you really want here because it will zoom to fit the selection, okay? What do you want the track height to be? I have it set to jumbo. You could have it set to fit to window. If it's set to fit to window, when I zoom toggle, it fits it to the whole window, okay? And we're back. That could be very, very helpful. And you can also adjust what do you want the view to be. Do you want it to always be at waveform / note view? Or maybe you're working in Elastic Audio and you want it to be in warp / note view. Either one of these is perfectly acceptable, or it can be no change. You can just want it to zoom in and not change the view. I like it to be waveform or note view because typically when you're editing either MIDI or audio, you want it to be in those views when you're zooming in, okay? And again, you have some other things you can adjust here, but this helps you with that letter E command, which is really, really helpful. Over in the mixing tab, you've got a couple of again, some of these are just preferences, not that big of a deal. Your sends, you can have them default to -infinity. What that means is when I create a new send over here in the mix window, I send it somewhere to the delay, let's say, the send defaults to being as quiet as it can be. No sound, okay? Maybe you don't want that to be your default. You could change that here in the preferences by unchecking it. Uncheck, click OK, and then when we go to create a new send, say busted 11 and 12, it's defaulted to 0, okay? And that might be helpful to you because then you can always adjust it from there. Again, just a preference, whatever you like to do. Back in the preference window, you've got a few different things. Smooth and thin data after pass. When you're writing automation, when you're holding that little fader and moving it up and down while we looked at in the mixing video, it's going to write little teeny points of information. And what this does, if you have this checked, is it smooths it out so it sort of reduces some of that data so you don't have these super pointless moves. It kind of makes it less taxing on Pro Tools, and that's very helpful. But you got a few different things you can look at. The one other thing I would suggest you do if you want to is have a default EQ and a default dynamics. What this does is it lets you pick one that you're pretty much going to use more often than not. So you could pick like the 4-band, and you could pick, the compressor limiter as your default. And what that does is if you choose a plugin here, it puts these two right here. Before it was just no insert and it jumped to plug-in, but it puts an EQ and a compressor right up there at the top, so you don't even have to go digging for them. It just is like a shortcut to get to them faster. That's pretty cool. Back here in the preferences, you've got processing tab. We looked at in the last video dithering, and in dithering you want to do it manually if you're bouncing down to disk, but we looked at recording to disk and exporting files. You want to use Audio Suite Dither, and usually Digidesign is the only one you can choose unless you bought your own, and the bit depth you can change it to whatever you need. And you can change this here to 16 bits, so it's going ahead and dithering to 16-bit when you're exporting audio. Really, really helpful. Over here is the TCE plugin effect settings. So when you're trimming with that TCE trimmer like we looked at in the editing video, you can use either the Digidesign or the time shift algorithm, and then you can have a default setting, which could be defaulted to male vocal or stereo mix. And this just tells Pro Tools when you're using that trimmer that this is the algorithm you like it to trim at. So leave it at factory default if you like, or just put it in instrumental polyphonic if most of the time you're going to do that. And I like to use time shift. I think it sounds really good. And then here's an important one right here. Importing automatically copy files on import is checked. That means if you import drum loops or you import any audio from another session, it's actually going to make a copy of it and put it in your session folder, because otherwise you may see it in Pro Tools, but it's actually reading it off of a different drive or off of your desktop. And when you go to save that session or open it up on someone else's computer, that audio is not going to be there. So always have that checked. That way it's actually in your session. All right. And then here too, the sample rate conversion quality, always have it at tweakhead. There's no reason not to. It's going to sound the best. It may slow you down a bit if you're converting back to a lower sample rate. No reason not to have that there. And the only other thing here on MIDI is you can have a couple things like display events as modified by real-time properties. If you remember in the recording MIDI video, we looked at real-time quantizing and how you can just check a box and it'll quantize it in real time, but it didn't actually move the MIDI data, but it sounded quantized. If you check this box, then it'll actually show the MIDI data move, just so your mind isn't tricked on you. You can see, oh yeah, I did quantize that. And then when you uncheck the real-time properties, they'll move back. All right. And the only other cool one here is you can have it automatically create a click track in a new session by default. And you might find that very helpful. Okay. Whenever you're done with all your preference changes, you just fire off OK and you're golden, and you can always change them whenever you want. Real quick on other settings while you're at the setup menu, playback engine is key. All right. With your playback engine, you're going to have a hardware buffer size. Only thing you need to know about this is set it as low as it'll show you. Some of you may only be able to go to 128, some of you down to 32, depending on what your audio interface can do. But when you're recording, set it as low as you can, and you'll have less latency, less echo in your recording. And when you're mixing or editing, set it as high as you can. That way Pro Tools won't stall out on you. It'll have more of a buffer when you're running more processive intensive things, okay? So that's just sort of the idea. Low when you're recording, high when you're editing and mixing. Obviously, if you have 2 processors or more in your computer, choose that. And the CPU usage limit, you don't want this to go any higher than 90 most of the time, because your processor needs to do other things like run your operating system, okay? Only other thing here too is you can choose to ignore errors during playback or record. Pro Tools by default will stop whatever's happening when there's an error, so you know. And some people don't like that because they just want to be able to not be interrupted. But that means that they may not know that an error has happened, and you could have a pop or a click in your session and not know it to go back and listen. I tend to keep this unchecked so that it will warn me if there's an error. Then I can adjust my hardware buffer setting or something if it's a problem. Same thing here too. You can adjust the playback buffer, and I usually keep it right there too. Okay, click OK and you're golden. Now while we're here also, I want to show you I/O. Now we looked a little bit at naming I/O by right-clicking on the input or the output and changing the name. But here's where you can see all your inputs, okay? You can see your audio interface here. You can see your stereo pairs of inputs. You can toggle them down and see that, that's really line 1, mic 2, Those are two mono ones. And it's really just a matrix to show all your inputs on your audio interface. By default, you don't need to have any of this changed, but here's a tip. Go ahead and name these according to what you typically plug in and name them here by default. So for instance, if you always have your main mic plugged in here, you could double click it and go, condenser mic. And if you always have your bass or guitar plugged into input 2, you can put guitar. Okay? And with your output, you could also, if your main outputs, double click it and go main out. All right? And you can also name buses. I've got some already named here, verb, guitars, and those are ones we did manually. But these will be your settings. So you click OK. Now, when I want to record, if this were a new audio track, and I choose input, my interface, I can choose my condenser or my guitar. All right, and so that's helpful if you have things set up and you don't change it very often. You go, oh yeah, it's in my guitar input. But go ahead and make those adjustments now, and just the way you like to work in Pro Tools. All right. Now, one thing I want to show you is markers and memory locations. These are very, very helpful. Let's flip back over to the edit window. I haven't set them up yet in my song, but I like to use markers to know where the heck I am in the song. And it lets you get a glance of, oh, here's coming a chorus, here comes a verse. And we do that on the marker ruler right here. It says markers. Again, if you don't see that, you can get it from the drop-down menu. Make sure markers is checked. What we do here is you can do this while you're playing live, or you can do this manually. I know that right here is the intro. And technically, the drum loop is right back here. So let's start right there in the intro. And what you do is simply press the enter button on your keyboard. And it brings up a new memory location dialog. You can do this also from pressing the plus sign in the marker window. Okay? And it says, all right, what do you want to call this? I want to call this intro. And I want it to be referenced to the bar and beat. I want it to just be a marker, and I don't want any other properties. I just want to leave it as it is. It's my first marker. It's called intro. Click OK. And there it goes. This little box shows up, says intro. And the whole thing is an intro, according to my markers. That's fine. You can see this yellow line going all the way down my session. That's the intro. You can always click and drag it. Okay, intro starts there. Oh, no, intro starts here. Or if we undo that, we can do it live. So I press play, and then I'm going to hit the enter key in real time. And so it just placed it right where I pressed enter, even though I didn't name it till somewhere over here. All right, and you can always drag it back. So you can always adjust those and fine tune them later. Now I know that's always my intro. And it looks like verse 1 starts right here. We'll call verse or V1, whatever you want to call it. And notice that the colors have changed here. If you don't see any colors, or again, that was in your setup preference menu, look under display and make sure that always display colors in your markers. I'm on an island, my shores are closed. So there we go, we're in a verse, and it looks like we're back here in a chorus. So chorus, and you get the idea. You can see at a glance where you are in the song. And of course, you can always adjust these. You can always select and click delete, and they'll be gone. Okay? That is using basic markers to tell you where you are in your song. Another way to use memory locations is to save some of your views. Okay, let me show you what I mean. Let's go ahead and bring up the memory location window. You do that from Window, Memory Locations, or Command or Control 5. And you can see I've got these 3 that I've already created, my intro, my verse, and my chorus. And I don't know if you notice up here, but when I click intro, the play start marker is going to jump back here. Click intro. There it is. Island, my shores are closed. I'm finding it hard. Just by clicking on the location, it's jumping there. And that's very cool. You can keep this window open and know you can jump right to verse 1. Island, my shores are closed in, and now I'm sinking, yeah. Now, what you can do is take this a step further with more memory locators. So what I'll do is I'm going to set up a certain view, okay? I'm going to take a look at my tracks, and I'm going to hide every single track by holding Option or Alt and clicking on the Show Hide. And then I'm only going to show my audio tracks, my guitars, my synths, vocals, harmonies, bass, drums. Okay, those are all my audio tracks. And what I want to do is create a memory location to remember this. Click Enter. Does not need a time property. Instead, I want it to be a track show hide and window configuration. And I'm going to call this audio tracks. Now it creates another memory location, right? Now, if I'm over here and I can see all my tracks, and I'm just mixing away and I just want to see my audio tracks, I simply come here and it only shows me my audio tracks. There you go. They're all gone. Everything's there. Now this can be helpful too if you just want to look at drums and bass, for instance, if you have multiple drum tracks or just your vocals. Let's take a look at that. We will get rid of everything and just bring in harmony, vocals, and let's say maybe the delay and verb. And I'm going to go ahead and change the track heights here. And then I'm going to go ahead and click Enter, and I'm going to call this vocals. Choose none, choose zoom settings, track heights, window configuration. Click OK. So you've got your audio tracks as one view. Vocals, there's just your vocals. All right. So what you can do is at one point just set up what you want to see and then just capture it as a memory locator. And it's not necessarily a marker like you've got up here, chorus, verse 1. Instead, you're using memory locations to remember what you had set up in your session. So I just want to look at the drums for now. I just want to look at the vocals. In a single click, you can do that, and it can save you a lot of time. All right? Now, after you've been adjusting your preferences, you've been tweaking your memory locations, markers, all these different things, you really have come to grips with how Pro Tools can work and how specific it can be. What I want to show you now is simply, you should really build a template, okay? Now, you've noticed if you launch Pro Tools, you get options to start with a template that they've already set up with, and those are great options to play around with, but you can customize your own template. And if you've liked the way you've created, your sessions, let's say, then you can go ahead and start a new session, build the tracks you want, set it up with these preferences the way you want. You don't have to have audio recorded, but say you want tracks for drum loops and tracks for reverbs that you're going to put in a master fader and all these different things. Go ahead and set it up. And the moment you have the session the way you like to work, for instance, I like to work with some virtual instruments already set up with the drum program, a bass guitar patch out of Expand. I like to have some vocal tracks, already named vocals. And again, everything's blank, but you get the track set up, you get the views set up, you get your preferences set up. And when you're ready, just come to File and choose Save as Template. And it's going to say, okay, do you want to install it in the template system that they've created? Like these are all the ones they've created. You could add a category like, Graham's templates. And then you could give it a name and call it songwriting template or, mixing template or experiment template, whatever you want to do, and then you're good to go. Click OK, and it's going to show up in your template section, and that way you can start with a already built session that has all the custom settings you like. Okay, so instead of starting from scratch, you can save some time with the template. It's really, really fun. I use it a lot of times when I want to get up and running quickly and I just have an idea I want to lay down. So create a session the way you like it, even if you don't record anything, and then choose Save Session as Template, and you'll be good to go. Well, that about covers all the customizing you need to know to make Pro Tools exactly the way you want it while you work. There's a million other fine-tuned details you can look at with customizing, but I wanted you to be aware of the most important ones, the ones I use on a daily basis. Start experimenting with all the menus up here, choose some of the options, some of the settings, and you can really start tweaking things to your advantage and setting it the way you want to work. All right? Thank you so much for joining us in the Pro Tools Bootcamp. This has been a lot of fun. I hope it's been helpful to you guys. And at this point, you've been hit with a lot of information, but you know more than 90% of Pro Tools users out there, and you can use that to your advantage. Get this in your head, use it day to day, and start making amazing music with your Pro Tools rig, and I bet you can outshine the rest of us, all right? So thanks for joining us. This is Graham from the Recording Revolution. Appreciate you guys being a part of the boot camp and for supporting the website. We'll talk to you soon.